in 2017 for the Iowa Council for Teachers of English, Dr. Thomas Newkirk of New Hampshire University said, "Narrative cognition is thought to represent the default mode of human thought, providing structure to reality and serving as the underlying foundation for memory." I really like this quote because I feel like it speaks to the importance of narratives. Stories are everywhere. In the movies we watch, the books we read, the TV shows we consume, the games we play, and even the conversations we have every day. If you tell something in a story, you're much more likely to remember it, and you're much more likely to take that piece of information and apply it. Every single story has a structure and has some form or seed of conflict. There are different types of conflicts within narratives. Today we're going to talk about narrative conflict as well as narrative structure. Let's talk about some of the conflicts in narratives. The first conflict type is your classic hero story. The villain versus the hero. A person versus a person. This is any time where the conflict centers around two individuals. The second conflict type is person versus self. So this is an example of where the conflict surrounds around one person and then something psychological going on within their mind. For example, in this book, Turtles All the Way Down, the main character is struggling with anxiety. And that is something that her spiraling mind keeps her from doing what she needs to do. And a big focus of the book is how she can overcome that. So this would be a great example of person versus self. The next example is person versus society. An example of this would be The Hunger Games. So in this, the main character, Katniss Everdeen, goes against society's norms, saying that the Hunger Games are not right and that people should not have to partake in them. She stands up against societal pressures. Any dystopian novel often has some part of person versus society in it. So this is one great example. But essentially, person versus society is any time when you have an individual going against a group or going against the societal norms. Next, we have person versus nature. So this is any time where you have a person trying to survive in the wild or trying to survive against some sort of natural force. This natural force could be like a hurricane, or like in the movie Twister, or for example in the movie San Andreas when they're trying to save themselves from an earthquake. Any survival story would be an example of person versus nature. Next up, we have probably my favorite, person versus technology. The science fiction genre definitely fits into this category. This particular book, which I highly recommend, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, is about a group of robot aliens who come down and have this really strange, unpredictable technology that the main characters have to try to solve. So it's a little bit of a mystery, but all of it is based on this outlandish technology that we don't experience today. A lot of science fiction stories would fall under that person versus technology category. So if a person's facing up against some robots, or a supercomputer, or artificial intelligence, those would all be examples of person versus technology. Next, we have person versus the supernatural. So Frankenstein kind of falls into the technology category and the supernatural, so that's why I kind of wanted to include it here, because Frankenstein was made by a scientist, but he's also definitely not natural. So anytime the main character is going against something that is otherworldly, whether that be a ghost, a demon, gods, some sort of fairy figure, that would all fall under the category of person versus supernatural. Another example of person versus supernatural would be Cassandra Clare's Shadowhunters series. I read 9 of these books this summer, and they were fantastic. I would definitely recommend. But essentially it's about a group of people in society that fight off the supernatural evil entities of the world so the rest of us stay safe. Now you know about the different conflicts in narrative. Person versus person, person versus self, person versus society, person versus nature, person versus technology, and person versus supernatural. We are going to next talk about the structure in a narrative. For this, we're going to jump into a slides so that I can show you a plot diagram. Let's get into that part of the lesson. When you think about narrative structure, you have to keep in mind that narrative events occur in space and time. The events of a narrative do not unfold randomly. If they do, you're simply going to confuse your readers. As you write a narrative, cause and effect is essential. Think about how one event leads into the next one. The logic of cause and effect ties together character traits, goals, obstacles, and actions throughout the entire narrative. Make sure the points in your plot can fit therefore or but in between them, instead of and then. If you think about this therefore and but causality, your plot points will fit together with the magic of cause and effect. And everybody is going to understand how things fit together well like a puzzle piece. This last tip about the therefore and but, I first heard on a YouTube video where the creators of South Park talk about their writing process. I'll put a card up here for that video in case you want to see more about that. Here is what the narrative structure looks like. So this is the chronological or typical structure. We start off with the exposition. This is where you meet the characters, establish the setting, and set the tone or norm of the story. Remember, the tone is like what the feel of the story is. Is this going to be a scary story, a comedy, a mystery, a love story? Think about all of these things as you think about the event that will happen in your exposition. As we lead in from the exposition to the rising action, we usually have some sort of inciting incident. So what this means is that there's some action that causes the current normal to shift or change, which leads us into the rising action and introduces the central conflict of the narrative, establishing tension between characters, between people, between other entities. Refer back to that conflict section in the previous part of the video. As you go from the rising action, you reach the top of the plot diagram to the climax, which is the turning point or the highest part of the conflict. Notice that after the climax, I have the plot diagram here a lot smaller. Often, much of the narrative is leading up to that climax, probably like 2/3. And then the following third is the following action, the resolution, and the resolution. So the following action is the aftermath of the climax. Then you have the resolution. So this is where you establish the new normal. What things have changed in the characters' lives or in the world that you've created based on what happened in the main conflict of the narrative. Again, it's really important anytime you're writing a narrative and mapping out plots that you think about cause and effect. Have your events build on each other and foreshadow each other. Draw the reader through the narrative as if they're experiencing it themselves. When you go to create narratives, don't forget these 5 basic structures of exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Now that you know about different conflict types in narratives, as well as narrative structure, you're ready to try your hand at writing a narrative. Thanks for listening. I hope you learned something, and have a great day.